There you go.
Hello everyone, my name is Devin Geraghty, and I'm going to be presenting Mozart and the development of the clarinet. So first I'm going to start by playing Mozart's Concerto in A. I'm going to start with the second movement, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of the history and the development of the clarinet and some history behind the piece, and then I'm going to end with the third movement of the concerto. about 1700, we started with the earliest semblance of the clarinet, the chalumeau, and it's made of a bamboo type material, and it's got 2 keys and tone holes through the center of the instrument. And the range of this instrument was about an octave and 3 notes, which is very small. Clarinet today has almost a 4-octave range, so it's a big difference. So what they ended up doing is they made multiple different types of these instruments in different sizes to cover a broader range. So they had a bass, a tenor, an alto, and a soprano. So the earliest popularity seen with this instrument was with aristocracy. So in the Habsburg court, Emperor Joseph I loved the chalumeau. He actually composed for the soprano chalumeau and played the instrument and performed for people. One of the things with this instrument is its flexible intonation, which is terrible for an instrument because that just means that it's very hard to keep it in tune with the rest of the people you're playing with. So this was not a solo instrument at all. It was used as more like a textural instrument to go along with other instruments, mainly used in opera to double the voice or some of the other instruments. And what's interesting is that there's only 6 surviving chalumeaus from the time period. So that's where we're getting all this information from. So I've got a little video of somebody playing this instrument. So now we move on to the second half of the 18th century, and we come across the Baroque clarinet. So as you can see, we've got the addition of a few keys. They bumped up to 3 keys and then to 5 keys to help the intonation, but it still wasn't that great, that well in tune. So the writing was still limited. You'll look back at the writing from this time period, and it's mainly just repeated notes or arpeggios or doublings. Nothing too crazy because it was very hard to play runs on this instrument. We see its earliest assimilation into a kind of military band. Actually, the first documented wind band was the 1st Battalion Royal Artillery. And this was an 8-man group that played using clarinets and other wind instruments, but the group was very poorly funded, so everyone in the band had to be proficient on multiple different wind instruments, which is kind of interesting. Then comes along Thomas Arne. He's a composer, the first British composer for clarinet, and he composes this piece, Thomas and Sally, and it calls for a trill on the clarinet, which is basically you're moving rapidly from one note to another, so it'd be kind of like. But what's interesting about this trill is he calls for a trill from A to B natural, which on the clarinet at the time period would have been. You can't do that quickly. So then George Miller comes along and he adds this 6th key right here, which is essentially a trill key. So it makes going from A to B and B flat to C much easier. So that's how that key came about. So I'm going to talk a little about reeds. That's this little bit right here. This is the most important part of the clarinet in terms of producing the best sound. So it's made of cane, which is the same material that the chalumeau was made of. And it sits on the reed, or it sits on the mouthpiece. It's held together by the ligature. So the French and Germans had a different style of playing, where the French preferred to play with the reed facing upwards. So look kind of like this, and you play like this. Where the Germans preferred to play how we do today with the reed down. And the French style of playing went out of existence very quickly because there was multiple things that were very bad with it. First, the articulation. Articulation is just separating notes using your tongue. So if you're playing with the reed facing up, it's impossible to articulate because you got the mouthpiece in the way. So if you look back at the French music around this time period, it was all slurred because they couldn't tongue. Also, the angle of the instrument. The most natural way to hold the instrument is close to your body, but if the reed is facing upwards, you have to hold it out here to play, which is very awkward. And also the volume. You can't play softly with the reed facing up. It's impossible. So all the music, they were just playing very loudly, whereas the Germans could play any range of dynamics. So I don't know why the French chose to play that way, but it was not good. All right, then comes along Ivan Mueller at the very beginning of the 1800s. And he creates his 13-key clarinet. Some of the notable keys being the G-sharp key, the E-flat, B-flat key, and most notably the F and C key. And that was really important because it really helped to go over the break of the instrument. And also, when you're playing in keys with a lot of flats, it made it a lot easier to do runs with those keys. So he introduced stuffed pads as well. Previously, most of the clarinets just had metal covering a hole, which caused a lot of intonation issues because you had a lot of air leaking out of those holes. So he put stuffed material in between the metal part and the instrument to help stop the air coming out of the hole better, which definitely helped with the intonation of the instrument. He also was the inventor of the metal ligature. Previously, they were using twine, which is a kind of string, so they would tie the string around the reed to the mouthpiece every time they wanted to play the instrument, so it was very inconvenient. So he came up with the idea of taking a metal ring with a screw on it, where you can just slide it over the mouthpiece and then tighten it so you can hold the reed to the mouthpiece. And his instrument was the first omnitonic clarinet, because previously they had many different keyed instruments, so they'd have a clarinet in E-flat, a clarinet in A, a clarinet in B-flat, to play in different keys specifically, which was very inconvenient because then a player had to have all these different instruments. Where this was the first instrument that one clarinet could play any piece. Because of how many keys it had, it made it much easier to play in a bunch of different keys. Something that's interesting to note is that we actually don't have any Mueller clarinets. They aren't in existence currently, or we do not know where they are. So the reason why musicologists give Mueller the credit for the 13-key clarinet is because they found a fingering chart that he had written for his clarinet. And so it has his clarinet, has the different notes that his clarinet was able to play, and the fingerings for them. And as you can see, with a shallow mode, you have an octave and 3 notes, whereas with the Mueller clarinet, it goes from the low E, which is the lowest note on today's clarinet, all the way up to a high A, which is around the same range, slightly smaller than today's clarinet. All right, some kind of recent developments with the clarinet. Arthur Bernard and Douglas Keefe were 2 physicists, and they really wanted to look at the physics behind the clarinet because that wasn't really something that was being done in the day. They published this paper in 1996, which is pretty recent. And so they argued that the best clarinet was the clarinet that was most in tune, because tone quality is by far the biggest thing when it comes to clarinets. And if you have several notes on your instrument that are out of tune, you have to change your embouchure to get those notes in tune. So that negatively affects the tone of your instrument. So what they argued is their threshold was 10 cents. They said if every note is within 10 cents of what it's supposed to be, that would be the ideal instrument. 10 cents being, if you have a semitone, which is just, it's the smallest increments that the clarinet can play, or the piano can play. That's 100 cents. So they argue that if it was within 1/10 of a semitone, then that'd be the best sounding it could possibly be. So I'm just going to play you an example of, there's going to be a piano playing a C, and then above that, it's going to play a pitch bend of 10 cents, and then it's going to go 20 cents, and 30 cents, and 40 cents, up to 50 cents. You can hear the increments of how out of tune it starts to get. It's 10 cents. 40 cents. And 50 cents. You can see how it starts to get out of tune very, very quickly. So 10 cents was where they were trying to keep it. So they did a lot of the research with the elongation factor, and this is kind of hard to explain. It's a little bit confusing, so bear with me. But this is the bore of the clarinet. So if I were to turn the clarinet like this and you looked inside, that's what it would look like. And as you can see, it's got this hollowed out wood, and it's got a ring of wood on the outside. And what's important to note is that these tone holes go through all the way. So there's an area in here that's open. So what they were interested in finding was when you have that tone hole open, well, how much area are you adding to the end of the clarinet by closing it? Because you have this extra area inside here. So they were trying to figure out how much of a factor that played in the length of the instrument. So you've got this equation here that they came up with, where B is the radius of the tone hole, A is the radius of the bore, T is this distance here that the tone hole is going through, and 2S is the intertone hole spacing, so the spacing between the tone holes on the instrument. And what they found is that most clarinets of the day had this DC value of 0.08. So what that would mean is that your elongation value would be 0.04. So what that means is that, say you have a bore of like a foot, you would have to multiply 0.04 to that to see what each tone hole has, what kind of effect it has on the end of the instrument. So if you had 12 times 1.04, you get 12.5 essentially. So you're adding a half an inch to the end of the clarinet every time you close a hole. So what they found, interestingly, is that most clarinets of the day did not have consistent DC values. Most of the clarinets of the day were conical. And they found that having a consistent DC value was the most important thing for keeping the clarinet in tune in the lower register. So that was one of the big discoveries. So here you have a chart. This is how many cents off it is. This is going lower in frequency. This is the lowest note in the clarinet. So here you have their clarinet. It's this solid line. And then here you have a lot of the clarinets of the day where the bore changes. It's not perfectly cylindrical, it's conical. And as you can see, this line dips well below this line. At the lowest note, it's more than 15%, 15 cents off of the clarinet that they proposed, having the perfectly cylindrical bores. And that's why we have perfectly cylindrical bores today. After this discovery, they got rid of the conical bores because they didn't make any sense. All right, a little bit of history on this piece. So Mozart was very good friends with his virtuoso player of the basset clarinet, Anton Stadler. And Stadler played in the Viennese Imperial Court Orchestra, where he was actually second chair. But that was by choice, because he preferred playing the lower notes on the clarinet, so he chose to play second chair. So Mozart really loved the clarinet, and he wanted to write a concerto for clarinet. But he ended up writing it for basset clarinet because his friend was so good that he was like, okay, I'll write it for basset clarinet. Even though the basset clarinet was extremely rare and hardly anyone played it, it would have been much better to write it for the conventional A clarinet that everyone played. The difference between the basset clarinet and the A clarinet is 4 semitones. The basset clarinet has an extra 4 semitones at the lower end. So it was premiered in 1791 in the Prague Theater, the same year that it was completed. And after Anton Stadler finished playing the piece, he lost the only manuscript that Mozart had. And Mozart died that same year, so he was never able to rewrite the piece. So about 10 years later, one of Mozart's friends went back and tried to reconstruct the piece, but this time he wrote it for the A clarinet, not the basset, because nobody was going to play basset clarinet. So after several years, a bunch of musicologists who were experts in Mozart decided to get together, and they looked at some of Mozart's previous works with basset horn and the reworked piece, and they ended up coming up with a version they thought was most accurate to what Mozart would have originally written for basset clarinet. So I'm going to show you a couple of compare and contrasts with the A clarinet part and what the basset clarinet part should be. All right, so this is in the second movement that I just played. It was one of the parts. You'll notice that with the A clarinet part, it sounds disjoint. It's not very linear. It doesn't. You can tell it's not how it's intended to be written. Whereas in the basset clarinet, it goes all the way down to the low register, and it's very linear playing. It sounds like it should have been. So here's the A clarinet part. And here's how it would have been on basset clarinet. That makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more linear. Now here's an example in the third movement where in the A clarinet part, you're going to hear a running line, and then you're going to hear her repeat the exact same line, and then she's going to bump it up to the next register. Whereas in the bass clarinet, you hear the low register, then the same melodic figure continues into the middle register, and then it continues into the upper register. So it's a lot more fluid. Here's the bass. And just a quick background, or a quick theory behind the three movements. First movement, entitled Allegro, I'm not playing that movement, but it's Sonata Allegro form, which one of the interesting things that I found in this is that in the exposition, the opening, the main theme is not played. There's 5 different motifs in the same key, but we don't hear the main theme. And it's not until about 3 minutes in when the clarinet solo comes in that we get the main theme. So that's kind of interesting. Pretty standard tonic, subdominant, and then back to tonic. That's what we would expect. Something else that's interesting is there's dominant fermatas in the first movement, and that's basically, instead of writing a cadenza in, what he did is he just put a dominant chord with a fermata over it, and it gave the performer the opportunity to decide to take a cadenza or not. They would just move along. That's also what was written in the second movement, which is the one that I played. So the second movement, Adagio, simple song form, ABA, starts out with a nice slow melody, picks up a little bit in the B section, comes back to the same melody at the end. It's in D major, which is the subdominant. And then we go on to movement 3, which is Rondo Allegro. It's back to the tonic, it's in 6/8. And so it's in rondo form, which is basically you have an opening theme A, and then it transitions to a new theme B, then it comes back to A. So it's kind of like ritornello forms, where it's A, B, A, C, A, D, where we go to a new theme, but we always come back to the original. Then we end in A on the tonic. And it moves to a couple minor keys. But I'm going to play that for you now.
about the French versus German reed position.
Yes.
Is the French position called for in any modern literature, and does it have any significant temporal change or effects?
I don't know if it's called for, but it sounds pretty gross. I can play for you if you want.
That'd be great. I like gross.